Welcome to the Gyroplane Flying Podcast. Albert shared with me back in 2019 when I started with Air Command, shared with me his experience with the Air Command gyroplane and the Skywheel rotor blades. And Albert and I have developed a very nice friendship through the time. And Albert's always been so open to share his learnings with me when he was looking at gyroplane flying, how to get into it. And I really took inspiration from what he was sharing with me. And I thought this is the makings of a really, really good podcast so we can share with others getting into gyroplane flying or considering it. How do you get started? So maybe that's one of the first questions, Albert, for you is when you started looking at gyroplanes and it piqued your interest, how did you get started?
Joe, for me, it started when I was really, really young. My dad took me to an air show and everybody was flying Bensons and I didn't know what they were. And so that was exciting for me. And I was probably 8 years old. But as I got into junior high and high school, every Popular Mechanics magazine had a build a gyroplane. And that just kept fueling me. And, decades later, every time I'd go to an air show, there were gyroplanes. It was like a message always being sent to me. So after the kids grew up, that passion was still there. And I decided I would find a club that had an instructor, and I would take an introductory flight and see if that excitement was still with me with an introductory flight.
That's always a great way to start, too, with an introductory flight. It seems to help people get the full experience. A lot of people contact us saying, and you can tell they've watched YouTube videos, and they've watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I know they can put themselves in that pilot seat flying that aircraft. There's always a lot of excitement. How did you arrange to do Discovery Flight, to go up and experience it firsthand, to give you the ideas of, hey, this is something I might like?
Yeah, I went online and I went to see where there was a gyroplane club and contacted the club representative. I asked them when they were having their next meeting and where, and I wanted to attend the meeting. And it turned out to be at their entertainment meeting, and there were a lot of videos being shown of different guys flying different kinds of gyros, and it just started from there. And I knew when I left that meeting, I was going to get an introductory flight. I was going to take that next step.
Wow, that's exciting, isn't it? How long ago was that, Albert? I know it's maybe a few years, but what do you think? How long ago was that?
That was over 10 years ago.
10 years ago, good.
Easily.
I apologize for this. We do have a slide deck showing Albert's gyroplane, but I am locked out from showing any of that information. So when I re-edit this for the posting later, I'll try and include those pictures, which were really, really nice, and give people a firsthand look at the gyroplane you built. And that's probably something we should really talk about so that people get the full perspective here. It's not only starting out getting a discovery flight, but it's also learning about gyroplanes and ultimately building your own gyroplane, unless, of course, you buy used. But take us through that whole experience, Albert. I mean, there had to be a lot of excitement, a lot of emotions, a lot of do I really know what I'm doing type questions, because eventually you're going to fly this. And that's a big leap of faith in some ways.
So, I will say that when I contacted the instructor, he was very enthusiastic. But for me, it was the ground school prior to actually flying, where he really was thorough in explaining everything to me, what I was going to experience, everything beforehand to reduce any fears that I might have. I had flown small airplanes before, so I understood being up in the air. What I wasn't ready for was an open gyroplane. I didn't have a structure around me. So now when we went up 1,000 feet, there was a new element there that I wasn't ready for.
Sure.
And, he gave me the controls, and that was fine. And he had me do some turns. And I was very gentle in the turns. And he kept encouraging me to really make an aggressive turn. And I've got to tell you, it probably wasn't aggressive. And we only had a lap belt at the time. I thought I was going to slide out of that lap belt, and I couldn't wait to land. And I said, that's it. I'm done. And I let a couple of weeks go by, and the excitement came back of what I had experienced. And that's when I booked my second official lesson in it. First, that being up that high without your eyes having a structure around it, it took something to get used to. But but the excitement was definitely there for me, and I knew I would be buying one or rebuilding one or something. And this was a good club. And in going to the club, there were probably more than a half a dozen different types of gyroplanes for me to look at and ask questions about before I started deciding on what I wanted for me.
Mm-hmm. Albert, I know ultimately you purchased an Air Command single seat open gyro, and we'll show a photo of that in the recorded version of the podcast tonight. So I want to make sure we touch on that and talk about it. Can you describe your experience with building, now that you've had that excitement of flying? Now it's a matter of taking all those emotions and plans and really putting them into action. And I know you purchased an Air Command with the raised seat and everything, but can you take us through that whole experience and building your gyroplane, what that meant to you?
Sure. Well, the first thing again for me was learning about the different types of gyroplanes out there, and knowing that I was going to be a student and making mistakes. I wanted, for me anyway, I wanted the strongest airframe I could get. And when I looked at the other gyroplanes that were on the market, I just felt that the Air Command was going to do what I needed to do for me. And so I actually bought a low rider type Air Command, and then I bought the kit to make it a centerline thrust. And so I actually wound up rebuilding the entire gyroplane from scratch, with only having the main components: rotor blades, engine, rudder, those types of things. The thing that I learned in it was, as you're building one, there's all the stories, the good and the bad. And as I was building, I was trying to sort out in my mind, what's legitimate and what's myth. And at the end of the day, I realized I had built this centerline thrust gyroplane, and I probably didn't need to. I could have probably just left it the way it was as an original lowrider, and it would have served me just as well. But it was a great experience building it, because there were so many little thoughtful things that were in that airframe that gave me confidence as I was putting it together. Great experience building it. Yeah.
There's no better way to know your gyroplane than to actually build it yourself.
That's right.
You have to take confidence in what you are doing, because your butt's eventually going to be in the seat, and you're going to make sure all those bolts are torqued to the exact specification. You're going to make sure the safety wire is all installed where it needs to be. I mean, you're going to do it very, very thoroughly.
And that's the thing. That's the great thing about the club. I didn't trust my eyes. I had 20 guys in this club that were encouraging me. They're critiquing me. They're showing me how to redo things. They're giving me their insight and their experiences. So this whole thing about flying a gyroplane, it just wasn't me out there. It was the strength of a club and a good examiner and a good instructor. that when that time came and I started taxiing my gyroplane and I started getting light in the seat, it really, I had all the confidence. Everything was right. Everything was aircraft quality, and I had a good solid airframe underneath me. It just made things easier in my mind.
That's great. What a great experience. So how long did it take you from the point of, doing your dual training with an instructor to really feeling confident that you could fly that gyroplane? How many hours do you think that was? Because the interesting thing is, I mean, obviously you were not flying a two-seat gyroplane. So at some point it's up to you. There's that moment of truth
That's
where
right.
I've gone through the training. I know, and you just said that. I knew what I was doing and I was ready.
Yeah.
So take me through that whole thought process,
Yeah,
because
so
at some point you have to say, okay, I'm going for it.
right. And that was terrifying. Only because, there's a time where your instructor knows you're good to solo and you don't feel you've accomplished enough and you don't have the confidence in yourself. And then there's the time that you're more than qualified, but you still don't solo because, well, anyway, for me, my instructor, and I, a little bit different, I do fly fixed wing airplanes. So I had that experience behind me. There were three of us actually at the same time, all flying air commands at different levels. And one guy had zero experience. He didn't even know how to taxi. He wound up soloing at about 15 hours. And that's not even knowing how to taxi. And so for the first couple hours, we all used the same instructor. It was harder on him because he's spending more time doing ground maneuvers and getting that confidence back. Because like you said, first time you land and now you're on the ground, you better know how to taxi at a higher speed, right? Because you just landed. And so he didn't quite get it why we're spending so much time doing ground maneuvers. But our instructor, well, he was just great. He took us all at our levels. For me, I probably had maybe 8 hours before I soloed. I had been flying the length of the runway at about 30 or 40 feet. So a little bit higher than hangar height, and then powering down and landing. But I always knew I was stopping at the end of the runway. That is where, Columbus is going to fall off the edge of the earth for me. And to keep the throttle in and to go all the way around, that was the unknown. And I had to fight that battle within me. And every week it was, I'm going to do it this week. I'm going to do it this week. And then finally, you just get to that point where, okay, now I know I can't land with the runway that's left. I'm going around. And then the minute you land, you think, gosh, I could have done this hours ago.
Sure.
My instructor didn't kick me hard enough out of the nest to be the fledgling, aviator.
That's a good way to put it. We're chatting with Albert Dyer. Albert is in Batavia, Illinois, taking us through some of his experiences with gyroplane flying. This is Joe Covelli with Air Command and Skywheels. And we have several people listening with us tonight. So if you do have a question, please feel free to use the chat, and we'll be glad to answer your questions for you. We'll be on the podcast here probably for another 10 or 15 minutes. And we want to make sure that we answer any questions that you have. Albert, take me to the point of rotor blades. I know you mentioned the airframe, and the things that were important for you was having a solid frame underneath you. Rotor blades are another very, very critical consideration. Obviously, there's a couple different kinds. There's the aluminum. There's also the fiberglass. Can you give us a perspective on what you looked at when you considered rotor blades?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the big things for me. I knew the Sky Wheel rotor blades weighed quite a bit more than any of the aluminum blades that were out there. And as I wanted to learn more of the science behind, flying a gyroplane, and, I had heard from pilots that flying a gyroplane, the rotor is like your wings. Well, yes and no. Managing that inertia from those rotor blades is really, really important. And for me, that helped me choose Air Command was the Skywheel blades. Because they're heavier, they store energy longer. So in those early hours of learning to fly, if I were to have flared a little bit too high, those blades would cone up, act like a brake to stop my forward, motion. But that energy that's stored gave me enough time to touch down gently. Whereas the aluminum blades, being lighter, they lost their energy a little bit quicker. So you had to be more on top of things. Well, as a student pilot, sometimes you don't realize you're behind a couple of seconds. So to have that assurance that I've got those sky wheels, that are going to store that energy, that was a big consideration for me. Yeah, so I chose the sky wheels.
Right, and there is a difference between them, and those are personal choices, and thank you for explaining that. If somebody is listening to us here and they're just thinking about getting started, don't really know who to reach out to, they might not have a flying club, close to them. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there are limited gyroplane instructors out there.
Yeah.
And sometimes you may have to travel a couple states away to find somebody or go train with somebody. What would you suggest to somebody, Albert, when they start considering that big question, who do I get training from? And I think that's one of the most important questions when you get started, because that is really the first step that you're taking. After you take a discovery flight, that individual you went with the discovery flight, that might be your instructor. It presents a good opportunity to learn about them. But I guess the question I have is, what questions should you ask a potential instructor so that you get a comfort level for their program, how they do things?
One of the things I was fortunate to have is there was, I think it still is, the oldest active gyroplane club in the United States, and that's in Lansing, Illinois. And I was outside of Chicago, and it was a decent drive for me every day. But that's the club that I joined to learn how to fly. And I know that's a huge problem, trying to find a club to get instruction. And it's not easy. I know that the next club from ours was in Indianapolis. So you wind up, if you're going to use an instructor out there, you wound up getting 2 or 3 guys together, checking the weather to make sure it's going to be good that weekend, driving there, getting a hotel for the night, and everyone's flying as much as they can that weekend. You can't teach yourself. I'm just going to say that. You have to have an instructor. And if you've got a club, within 150 miles of you, great. If not, it's just going to be, you got to make that drive, rent the hotel for that weekend or block out. There was a few guys that wanted to learn how to fly. They took a whole week and went to where the instructor was and got a hotel for a week. That was a common thing back then also with some instructors. But sure, you got to have instruction. You have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike sent us a question. He said, there are no gyro clubs in my local area. Please tell the audience about your club, where it is, how many members, how many instructors, can you rent a gyro, or do you have to only own a gyro? Fees, right, rules, things like that.
Right. So again, mine was in Lansing, Illinois, and it was a very, very active club. We had 2 instructors. There were a lot of gyros. We actually had, I guess I could say this also, since we're addressing it, our club hangar. We had to have a good relationship with the airport manager, because they're going to rent us a hangar, and we're going to stuff as many gyroplanes in this hangar as we could. So we're all kind of on the hook for this rent for this hangar, and we better conduct ourselves in a professional way because, we'll have 8, 9, 10 gyroplanes in there. Well, in our where we were, there were actually 3 hangars that were being used for gyroplanes. It was just that active, and that's pretty unique. Um, like I said, I know quite a few people. Nobody. So we had instructors, and all the instructors had to place gyroplanes of different types, and so I had that choice of what I wanted to learn to fly in. For me, I wanted to fly in a side by side so my instructor could point at things as we were flying. But also, this gyroplane flew like a truck, which means it took off at a speed, it cruised at the same speed, it landed at the same speed, which I knew was going to be about the same speed of my gyroplane. Therefore, the perspective of takeoff and landing was going to be the same.
Mhm.
So I didn't care about how fast I was going to go. I wanted the same climb speeds and the same landing speeds for depth perception. And then we all had to buy our own. We couldn't rent a gyroplane.
That's a great comment. And for those that aren't a pilot, what you just shared is very critical to that you learn from a similar platform. It's not too heavy on the stick. The air speeds and everything check out. And also as a pilot, you start to listen. You start to hear the different pitch of your engine, how it sounds, and then you respond. You respond to these audible cues that you're hearing also, I believe, as you're flying a plane. And I just remember those experiences. Albert, your flying club, that's in Lansing, Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, right?
ARA
Okay,
Chapter 18.
Yeah, chapter 18 in Lansing, Illinois. And I've been to that club before a few years ago. That's a nice group of people there. Tom Milton is there and many others.
Right.
So, yeah, good group. Albert, how about somebody has completed their training and now they're just building time, which is such an important thing. Once you get your license or certificate, your pilot certificate, the learning doesn't stop. You have to continue to master the skill set.
Right. So, for me, again, I'm in this club and a lot of us were flying. There's another aspect that we had to be aware of, and that is when we were out flying and practicing maneuvers, we never wanted to fly over the same area every weekend because where we're at, there's a lot of farmland and you don't want to keep upsetting the animals below you. So we had 5 or 6 different training areas. So we went, we're trying to be good neighbors in the air with the people on the ground. And so that's what we did. We would fly in 2 of us, 3 of us together. We'd practice maneuvers depending on the limitations of the gyroplane. For me and mine, I built mine as a trainer. So it didn't have a lot of performance. Other guys had, gyroplanes that, wow, they were just impressive to watch. For me, I just wanted something that would get me in the air safely, down safely, rock solid, and allow me to do basic turns about a point, figure eights, just basic airmanship and learn, like you said, learn the sounds of the engine and the wind and what my gyroplane was, trying to tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all very important considerations as you continue to build, your experience, and it only comes through time and practice. If there's one thing that you could share with somebody who's new to gyroplanes and maybe hearing about these things for the first time, Albert, what would you suggest to them? What would you say? Always keep this in mind.
Again, I have to really, really thank my instructor because he probably spent more time given to us in ground school, pre-flight and post-flight, over a cup of coffee than we ever paid for in actual flying. I mean, the man was so knowledgeable in telling us how to manage the rotor, in telling us about the things to be aware of what you can do and can't do in a gyroplane that'll keep you safe. Um, so, at least for me, I probably was a member of the club 6 months or longer of listening and watching and looking and asking questions, narrowing the field down to what I knew I was going to buy. Um, and I think the most important thing for me is rotor management, be it if you're taxiing on the ground into the wind or a tailwind or once it's in the air, rotor management.
Mhm.
And I was always aware of that to keep me safe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. If you do have a question, feel free to send it over the chat. We're talking with Albert Dyer. Albert is in Batavia, Illinois, a gyroplane pilot, been through the whole experience with buying, building, and flying his Air Command gyroplane for several years. Albert, do you still own, I know you haven't flown recently probably, but do you still have the gyroplane?
I do not. Part of this bucket list thing, if you want to call it, for me
Mhm.
was I wanted to build a gyroplane. I wanted to develop an operating manual. I wanted to do all the testing of it. I basically wanted to go through the steps of being an aircraft manufacturer more than learning, it was just as important to me to do that type of structured thought process and then enjoying the flying. So I actually did go to an FAA office, brought in my book, my pictures. We talked theory. So it was more than just taking lessons for me. I really went over the tips of my skis and dove into the science behind it because, gyroplanes were out there before helicopters. It's what got us from the airplane to the helicopter. And the history of it is incredible. The science behind it is pretty simple. I get excited about those things. And now, understanding the history and the science, now you say, let's go build one. And now we're going to fly it.
Right,
That's really exciting. And
right.
that's what all of those things motivated me.
Right, definitely. There's one important thing I want to make sure we touch on because we've talked a lot about instruction. We've talked a lot about rotor management being the very important thing that you mentioned. How about the inspection? So once you build that airframe, you put all that blood, sweat, and tears into it and hours of meticulous work to just make it absolutely perfect. Now somebody is going to inspect it. So now you've made the call to the FAA or the designated airworthiness representative. Could you take us through that process that you experienced when you had your gyroplane inspected for compliance with the regulations?
Yeah. So we had a person, Tom Milton, actually in this case, who was a representative for the FAA, and he who would give us our certificate and our limitations for those hours of testing, and then I could have a repairman certificate when I took everything to the FESDO and they approved all my work. That allowed me to do my own maintenance since I built it. However, this is part of being in a great club. I would look my gyroplane over every year, and then we had a couple of other guys come in and look over it. And we all looked over each other's gyroplanes because, you can't have too many eyes. And we did that all the time. We always took care of each other. Yeah, and it's what made it a great community.
Right. And lower
Yes,
stress level
yes.
when you have all those eyes on it. Now, we do have a question. Somebody wrote and asked if we have some contacts, maybe in the North Texas area for flying clubs. I personally don't, but I wanted to mention that to you, Albert. You could help out.
There's the PRA organization, and if you contact them, they will tell you where everybody is in the United States. And they could put you in touch with somebody who's a representative in that state or several people, you know. But that's what I would do, pra.org, I guess.
Yeah, .org. Yeah, the
Right?
Popular
Yeah.
Rotorcraft Association, pra.org, is a great resource. And they also have a training tab. We did a training podcast last month, and we referred people to that website. They have a web page as a part of the pra.org that lists all the instructors, or many instructors, certified flight instructors in the United States. That would probably be one of my first contacts. So if you're in North Texas, I would just see who's listed for Texas and just start to network and find out who's out there. Maybe look at Facebook for groups. They might have a flying club group, or I would just reach out to an instructor and maybe find out, who's out there and what they're doing. Those are
And I
just some
thought
quick thoughts.
for a while, the PRA, and this goes back a while, and of course things change, but to get more instructors, there was scholarship incentives. They would fund you to become an instructor if you would then give back so many hours of training at the back end to try to get that instructor pool higher numbers. So that's another reason for going with the PRA and asking them what kind of grant programs or scholarship programs they have, getting you from a new person learning to fly through your private, through your instructor.
Right. Albert, there's one question too that was just posted in the chat. Did you fly at all in an enclosed gyroplane? Somebody had asked if you could explain the differences in experience between an enclosed and open air.
I have not. I could tell you what I experienced in open air, and you don't want to fly in the winter. It gets pretty doggone cold really quick when you're in an open frame gyroplane. But no, I haven't been in an enclosed one. Never have.
Okay, I was just looking over a couple other questions that we have. Did your instruction include GA pilot training subjects, such as sport or private, airspace, communications, weather, ATC operations, things like that?
Absolutely. This is why I loved it so much. Again, I already was a private pilot. But my instructor, again, he asked where our levels were. And like I said, there were three of us that were together, and the one person had never flown anything. So when we got together, it was a refresher for me. But yeah, you have to know everything about your environment and your airspace. I'm just south of the O'Hare airspace. I better not violate that airspace. So yeah, weather, you want to get your gyroplane rating. So all of these topics, if you're going to have a training class, it's all covered.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, like we mentioned before, the first point of contact is an instructor. I would suggest meeting with somebody, and these are all great questions, but I would pose those questions to a potential instructor and actually have it like an interview where you really are looking for information. You're trying to gather as much as you can, and make sure you walk away with their training syllabus. Make sure you know what their program looks like and how they approach it. All things are considered.
The easiest thing to do is look at the sport pilot syllabus, and that's what you're going to need to know as far as weather, airspace, everything you'll know. And then there's the gyroplane part of it, and you'll be in great shape.
Right.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I waited decades from that first me seeing it as an 8-year-old kid, these Bensons flying around, and I waited decades, and that desire for that first lesson was still there. And like I said, when I walked away from that first 30-minute lesson, I couldn't wait to get down. I was never so scared in my life because there wasn't a structure around me, and I'd never been 1,000 feet in the air and nothing around me. And it took a couple of days for me to settle down. And as I was settling down from that experience, man, that excitement started rushing into me. And then I knew I was hooked.
Right, exactly.
You know,
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that story, Albert. Well, I think we'll wrap it up at this point. It's been about a half hour, and I surely appreciate your time and information and sharing your wisdom too with gyroplane flying. It's more than what people see in a video. That you got to experience it. You have to go through it to really appreciate it, I believe. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you very much, Albert. Okay. I want to also thank those in the listening audience. This is our 4th podcast now, and I'm pleased to share that the first 3 podcasts, I just looked at this the other day on YouTube, have reached over 1,000 downloads for all 3 of them. And so we really appreciate your following us and what we're doing. If you have a suggestion on a topic that we can chat about, you're more than welcome to send that to us. Our email is info@aircommand.com. That's info@aircommand.com. You can also find our podcasts and the podcast library of all previous episodes at our website, aircommand.com, gyroplaneflying.com, and then we're also on several channels to include YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and iHeart Podcasts. So that's where you can find the podcast. Thank you very much for listening tonight. Albert, thank you very much for your great comments. We'll look forward to having you back again sometime soon. Everybody else, take care. Have a great day.
Good night.